Welcome to this week's Resilience by Default Deep Dive podcast. Let's get right into today's explainer. We're looking at the EU's Digital Operational Resilience Act, or as we all know it, DORA. Now, this was supposed to be the ultimate harmonizer for the European financial sector, but as we're seeing halfway through its implementation, the machinery is seriously groaning under its own weight.
The framing on this is just crucial. Terry's article makes it crystal clear right out of the gate, stating this is not a failure, but it is a warning signal. So DORA is showing some very visible signs of strain, and honestly, we need to treat this as a massive, blinking red light for the entire European financial sector. We've got to pay attention to these cracks before they turn into full-blown chasms.
Let's look at the expectation versus the reality here. The dream was a single, coherent, harmonized rulebook covering ICT risk, resilience, and third-party oversight across the whole continent. But the reality? Well, it's a lot messier. We're looking at heavy regulatory friction, massive delays in technical standards, and just incredibly uneven readiness across the board. In this explainer, really going to dig into why that initial expectation is clashing so hard with the current rollout.
Moving right into Section 1, Friction and Rule Instability, let's look at the first major regulatory roadblocks that are slowing this whole framework down.
Okay, so let's unpack this friction. A really public example of this popped up recently when the European Commission insisted on throwing the European Unique Identifier into the DORA registers of information. Well, the European Supervisory Authorities, the ESAs, pushed back, and they pushed back unusually bluntly. They explicitly warned that this move is going to increase the reporting burden, reduce data quality, delay the critical ICT third-party provider designation, and basically just undermine supervisory consistency everywhere.
And here's the real so what of that situation. When the regulators themselves can't agree, industry confidence naturally just drops. I mean, seeing these major regulatory bodies clash over the absolute fundamentals, it completely diminishes the market's faith in this whole unified approach. If the people writing the rules are arguing, how on earth is the industry supposed to follow them?
That disagreement ripples straight out into actual rule instability. DORA relies so heavily on these regulatory and implementing technical standards. But right now, it's like trying to hit a moving target. These standards are getting delayed, revised, contested, and then thrown back out for reconsultation because the underlying rules just keep shifting beneath everyone's feet. Organizations literally cannot finalize their architectures, their data models, or their assurance frameworks, and supervisors, they certainly can't enforce them consistently either.
Ultimately, all of this creates what Terry's article calls a diluted data model. The underlying framework is just becoming way too complex for any real-world adoption. The whole promise of having this unified, EU-wide resilience dataset is getting totally compromised by political and technical fragmentation. So instead of clarity, we're getting divergent national interpretations, massive maintenance overheads, and much slower supervisory analytics. It's basically the exact opposite of harmonization.
All right, on to Section 2, Uneven Readiness and Capacity, because there is a massive disparity in how prepared both the market and the regulators actually are right now.
Terry's article highlights a really stark contrast out there in the market. On one hand, you've got high readiness among the large banks and the hyperscalers, mostly because they were already operating pretty close to DORA level maturity anyway. But on the other hand, there is critically low readiness across asset managers, payment service providers, crypto providers, and your more niche ICT vendors. Because DORA's scope is just so incredibly huge, not every sector had a pre-existing operational resilience baseline to work from. So what we're left with is a two-speed market, where the firms that desperately need a resilience uplift are actually the least prepared to pull it off.
And, it's not just the industry. Terry's article notes that DORA wrongly assumes there's this consistent supervisory capability across the entire EU. In the real world, supervisory capacity is completely scattered. Cyber maturity varies wildly. ICT risk expertise varies, resourcing varies. Even basic experience with resilience testing differs completely from one member state to the next. And that just creates uneven enforcement, which is literally the exact fragmentation DORA was built to eliminate in the first place.
Which brings us to Section 3, Oversight Delays and Overlap. This is the final set of friction points, dealing with delayed oversight and an incredibly confusing web of interacting frameworks. Now, DORA's biggest, most transformative feature is supposed to be direct EU oversight of critical ICT third-party providers. But here's the catch. That oversight depends entirely on a sequence of 3 steps. You need finalized technical standards, then you need agreed identifiers, and finally, a functioning designation process. It's like dominoes. If those foundational steps aren't in place, the whole designation process is going to face massive delays. And without that, DORA's grand ambitions to tackle systemic risk are going to remain completely incomplete.
Then you throw in this tangled web of other regulations. Organizations are looking at this and asking some really tough questions. Like, how exactly does DORA interact with NIS2? Which one supersedes the other? How do we stop duplicating work we're already doing for GDPR? And what does harmonized actually mean in practice when you look at the existing EBA outsourcing guidelines? Terrace's article points out that without a clear, authoritative mapping between DORA and these other regimes, we're just creating incredibly painful, unnecessary complexity for everybody.
Okay, let's look at Section 4, Building Pragmatic Resilience. The machinery might be jammed up right now, but Terry's article makes it absolutely clear that DORA is not a lost cause. It just needs a serious strategic pivot.
Which leads us to the ultimate question. What on earth needs to happen next? How can the EU shift gears from pure regulatory ambition into actual operational pragmatism so we can save this program and properly protect the financial sector?
Well, to achieve true pan-European digital resilience, Terry's article lays out a very specific, pragmatic EU action plan. First, they have got to stabilize that technical standards pipeline so businesses can actually plan their next moves. They need to resolve this identifier fragmentation, accelerate the critical provider designation, and desperately provide those authoritative mappings to NS2 and national regimes. Plus, they need to invest heavily in supervisory capability across all member states and fundamentally cut down on unnecessary reporting complexity. Make no mistake, DORA can absolutely still succeed, but actioning this list is pretty much non-negotiable at this point.
It really all boils down to this brilliant closing thought from Terry's article. Resilience is not built through regulation alone. It is built through clarity, consistency, and capability. I mean, regulation is just the map, right? But those 3 C's, clarity, consistency, and capability, that is the actual vehicle that's going to get you to your destination.
So, your absolute key takeaway today is this. DORA has the ambition, but it doesn't yet have the alignment. The real question is, will Europe's regulators be able to bridge that gap and deliver on the promise of true systemic resilience? Or is the friction going to prove just too great to overcome? Think about how your own organization is navigating this maze right now, because it is certainly a complex one. Podcast released every Tuesday on Spotify and YouTube. Like, subscribe, and repost. It helps us build the channel and focus on what's important to you.